Just looking back at the coverage of the Johnny Depp case against the Sun that was covered in the papers on Tuesday, the 3rd of November. The details will be discussed in the relevant parts about the continuing diagnosis of the corrupt judicial system in this country. And as I was saying earlier, the criminals that are on licenses, licensed law traders, as either barristers or solicitors in the main in England, are never held to account for the wrong advice that they give or the wrong role that they play in the name of their so-called clients. I mean, Johnny Depp is reported to have spent £5 million, or the cost of his action against the Murdoch scum has been estimated as costing him £5 million when the full bills are paid, according to the Telegraph, Boris Graf piece. That shows that whoever advised him as the kind of decisive but definitive, quote, lawyers, that is licensed law traders, must have had their eyes on the money that they could make, regardless of the outcome. And that is what happened. If I were advising Johnny Depp before he started the proceedings against the Sun, I would ask him to provide me with all the evidence. And then I would advise him not to sue the Sun on the ground that he did. Because if he has told the truth in his statements and representations in the court, in the proceedings, about the behavior of Amber Heard, his ex-wife, then he should have considered the possibility that she would be the main asset against him in the case that the Murdoch son would invoke and use, which they have done. So the fact that he was kind of made false kind of allegations against by the Sun did not get kind of altered by the court proceedings. He should have instead published a full account in a book ahead of the kind of court case against the Sun, or without bringing the case in the way that he did. And that way he would have saved a lot of money and he would have saved his reputation. He would have been able to say the things against Amber Heard that he could not say now. And this is the kind of legal advice that I have given to many people over decades. And I have saved a lot of people any amount of money. And I have saved a lot of them from going to jail. Essentially, in my understanding of genuine legal advice, that alone is legal advice which is truthful and based on the true accounts of the particular person seeking the advice of all the relevant facts. Johnny Depp and his lawyers lied to each other, and they were on a fantasy kind of trail. If Depp had said to the lawyers, so-called law traders, licensed law traders, everything that he should have known, potentially, Amber Hard would tell the court, then he should never have brought that case. Not in that way, not in that form. Because quite apart from the truth of the matter, the English judiciary is a business place. It is not about justice, most certainly not about the truth. And that has been proven in this case. And the lawyers have laughed all the way to the banks. £5 million. If Johnny Depp had spent a fraction of that, half or a quarter of that money, and commissioned a book, it would have had a better kind of impact. And he would have been vindicated in many things, because Johnny Depp has got a record of taking stance on principles, on many things, on many issues. The way he has been kind of reported in the Fleet Street papers did not give credit to him for the various principled stance that he has taken. He has come across as a caricature, as a thug, as a drunken thug and a man out of control. He should have saved himself all of that by publishing a book and then getting Amber Hard to sue him. That would have been kind of the better option. And he would have had more opportunities to go through many of the things that he could not go through because of the commercial, greedy kind of nature and the tabloid kind of fetish about sex and violence that has dominated the coverage of the proceedings and various other things. So we shall be continuing the discussion about Johnny Depp and the ruling and the implication on the public about the parading of the English judicial business and bureaucracy as a place through which to seek justice. Justice is not the case there. It is never the case. Now, going back to the events of the calendar years 2010 up to now, and concerning the behavior of Lutfur Rahman, who was in place for 6 calendar years as the elected mayor of Tower Hamlets, and John Biggs, who has been in place since 11th of June 2015 up to now. And the news that Tower Hamlets Council has prosecuted one of the 2 Tower Hamlets Bara constituency members of parliament, Afsana Begum, with 3 counts of housing fraud. As the Rupert Murdoch Sun newspaper, which you call Scum generally, boasted of publishing as an exclusive during last week. The fact that Tower Hamlets Council has been allowed to come across as the prosecutor of a fraudster, alleged, gives the wrong impression about Tower Hamlets Council's role in criminal creation of housing shortage, denial of housing rights, denial of housing support, And this should be seen in the context of the publication in the last 24 hours of a claim by the current incumbent, the racist liar, John Biggs, that he would concede, give away powers to councillors, which he has not given to them over the last 5 years. This gives the impression that Biggs is a reasonable person, that Gibbs is prepared to work democratically, accountably, and honestly. Now, this is not the evidence. This is the fantasy and the spin. The evidence is that John Biggs is has been one of the racist liars who has been prepared to deny the most vulnerable people the support that the council owes a duty to provide. Now, I'm here kind of referring to persons in the third person for the ease of understanding. If I say I or mine or related to me or whatever, then that would be kind of diverting the thing, the narrative. The normal narrative is for me to present the evidence as a narrative, as a commentary done in the third person, so that the reader and the viewer and the person watching this would be following this without having distractions of personal kind of involvement and empirical diversions and deviations in the narrative, not in the facts, but in the narrative. So let's say that a woman who was undergoing treatment, regular treatment for depression and other illnesses, that she was receiving regular medication during, let's say, 1985, 84, 85, till 95, till 2001, up to the middle of May 2001, let's say. So the person was in need of full-time support from the members of the family. And after her mother passed away in August 2000, her caring became an emergency that has to be met by alternative provisions, because her mother had been looking after her for all those years. So this woman needed additional support, not any support being withheld from her, but additional support provided to her. Instead of supported with additional support, and instead of a new carer or caring arrangements being provided with consultation with her biological family members that were caring enough for her welfare, this woman was allowed to be tricked by one member of her biological family, who tricked her out of London, UK, and took her to Bangladesh. Now that happened in May 2001. So just nine months after her mother passed away. And in the 9 months, Tower Hamlets Council intentionally, deliberately, and knowingly allowed the vulnerability of this vulnerable person to get worse to the point where at the beginning of May, or the first part of May, she was able to be tricked out of her home in Tower Hamlets and taken to a plane and taken to Bangladesh. Now that was in May 2001. We're talking now in November 2020, 19 years later. And for 16 years, or just over 15 years, let's say, this woman was kept deprived of her medication and starved of her welfare benefits. And her passport was stolen, and her passport was, by all the reports that have appeared, sold or hidden by the same member of her family who tricked her out of this country. So she was actually caused a very painful 15 years of suffering, during which time Tower Hamlets Council was approached repeatedly to confirm to the UK immigration authorities that this person was indeed a resident in Tower Hamlets, one was living in Tower Hamlets, and all the details they knew. And she should be on emergency health and humanitarian grounds, be allowed to return to London, and her passport should be kind of made available to her as a replacement with all the details, updated details. The UK Immigration and the UK High Commission in Bangladesh repeatedly, racistly refused to take any evidence, any proof, all the proof that were sent to them. And all of these meant that the council would be the source that would make the difference if they confirm to the High Commission the details. And the council, Tower Hamlets Council, personnel that are in post for adult social care and all the other care, so-called, lied. And they repeatedly left out key information from the so-called draft that they sent to the UK High Commission in Bangladesh. Thus, what happened was that whatever reasons they were kind of lying for meant that this person who needed daily kind of medication and had been on daily medication for most of her life was deprived continuously, and her health completely kind of kept deteriorating. And the basic facts of this was made known, the factual communications to the High Commission, various High Commissioners, because in the period of 15 years, more than one High Commissioner was in post. And all of the High Commissions, immigration or entry certificate officer, whatever, lied. And they lied based on the image, collective image. Now this person was not capable of doing anything like altering her passport or details. And they kept demanding proof of her passport, which passport, the original passport, had been stolen and sold or hidden by the same member of her biological family. Now, the circumstances surrounding the behavior of this particular member of the family, the evidence overwhelmingly was that this person was constantly trying to prevent the return of this vulnerable person. So every time a way was found, this individual shifted this vulnerable woman from the address from home. So they took her to various other addresses to hide her from access and communication. All the details are documented and made available, and most of the substantial evidence, not every single word, but the substantial and representative evidence of the effectively series of tortures that this woman was being caused and perpetrated on, or was being perpetrated on her. All the evidence was made available to the Tower Hamlets Council concerned personnel in the so-called social service. And the council was being warned from the very beginning that unless this vulnerable person was allowed to return home to UK immediately, she would suffer, which she did. And she suffered until she passed away in late 2016. So it was 15 years plus. So over those 15 years plus, information about her various states of urgent need for help, information was made regularly available to Tower Hamlets Council. And this was one of the issues, topics, subjects, emergencies that Lutfur Rahman lied to ignore. And this was one of the topics and issues that John Biggs later lied in order to ignore it. So whatever safeguarding of adults or adult social services service was on the kind of papers available by Tower Hamlets Council for the people who needed the help was denied this particular vulnerable Bangladeshi woman who was tricked out of her home in May 2001, and calls for helping her were obstructed, ignored by the British High Commission, the UK Home Office, the Immigration Section, the British High Commissioner in post at the time, whoever it was, and the Tower Hamlets Council, which was the local social services, persisted in lying, in series of lying. So a woman who was in much better physical and mental condition when she was tricked out, deteriorated. And instead of helping her cause to be given documents that would have helped her return to London and receiving the medication that she urgently needed every day, she was treated as a kind of excuse by two members of her biological family who got engaged in various litigation and cases. And any reading of one of the cases, or one of the appeals by one of the two who appealed against a conviction over an allegation of criminal harassment against the other member of the biological family. The reading of the case would show that this woman was not even recognized as to who she was. Her name even wasn't there. The misnamed her in the papers, which means that in the court proceedings, whatever number of court proceedings took place, they treated her as if she didn't exist, except as an excuse for them, those two, to use against one another. So that's one woman that was in direct daily danger and was being tortured effectively on a daily basis while she was stranded in Bangladesh, and the Tower Hamlets Council intentionally decided to deny her support that she was entitled to. Now that's one woman, and her other part of her biological family had children, relations. She had nephews or nephew and nieces. A group of those relations were under different kinds of abuse and attacks. And that too, that collection of cases, if you like, or causes, was added to the cause of this woman. And our campaign, whenever it became aware of what was happening, we didn't know the actual details from the start of the day-to-day activities concerning the welfare of the children. We made discreet communications to the council that they should intervene in stopping the problems that were being caused by the Tower Hamlets community housing and Steve Hill in the Tower Hamlets Council Benefits Office, so that appropriate care and attention and support could be provided to these women and children, and these children could be helped. Again, Tower Hamlets Council, knowing all the key facts and being made aware of the very serious issues of vulnerability to which these children were exposed, Tower Hamlets community intentionally refused to help. And by Tower Hamlets Council, it should be Tower Hamlets Council, not community. Tower Hamlets Council is meant here, Lutfur Rahman, and after him, John Biggs. So when the council is reported by the Murdoch-controlled Sun that it has taken a lawful step to save the public the money that housing fraudsters may be involved in kind of abusing and so on, the council's image is the exact opposite of what the council has done in those two cases, or those two sets of cases, or those sets of cases, because those two cases plus the case of our campaign. So here we got three sets of cases against Tower Hamlets Council, where Tower Hamlets Council personnel and the executive mayor repeatedly lied about basic information about three sets of emergencies that were connected with one another, because all the emergencies involved the council's lying and negligence of the past and of the immediate past and continuing past, and resulting in losses of support to vulnerable people, losses of support to vulnerable children, and losses of support to the caring organization and campaign. So if anyone is familiar with the kind of behavior of the councils in relation to vulnerable people, say for example, the behavior of the councils exposed in the belated reports in Rochdale and other places, Barnley, Rochdale, across the northern areas in Yorkshire. Anyone who actually knows about the factual depth of frustration suffered by the children being abused, only they can understand what John Biggs and Luther Roman did in Tower Hamlets. Because both of them, John Biggs and Luther Roman, lied whenever contacted about emergencies and serious lying and failures being done by Tower Hamlets Council. They lied, and in the case of Luther Roman, as has been said before, he had a cabal of liars who, whenever contacted, said the identical statement that Luther Roman is, as addressed to me, most respectful and is doing his best to help. He never did, and he never showed what respect he was supposedly having. Now, in the list of organizations that Luther Roman paid millions of pounds to as grant money, as revealed by the accountants, there are organizations that were paid hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands at the direct order and decision of Luther Roman. Those organizations included a number that did not even apply for the funding. Whereas this woman being tortured in Bangladesh and deprived of urgent medication in Bangladesh, and the group of children being abused in London, their kind of suffering and the losses of support would have significantly been changed if a fraction of that money was made available to the caring organization that was engaged in communications to Luther Roman and the rest of the particular post holders in Tower Hamlets Council for years. In the case of Luther Roman, for the whole of these 6 calendar years. And his so-called housing cabinet member, Rabina Khan was in total brazen, contemptible denial of basic words and concepts. to the point that on the 26th of June 2013, when I presented the question to Tower Hamlets Council about the Tower Hamlets community housing, Rabina Khan made a completely bogus, false, untruthful, and criminal statement that had not been at all part of my question. It was at that time that the then speaker of the council, that is the person who chaired the meeting, council meeting, Leslie Pabbit, another racist woman, stupid to the core, she decided to suspend the council meeting for a few minutes on the idiotic pretext that a man from Wapping called John White was filming the proceeding of the meeting. Now, John White, contrary to the contents of what he said in the video that I recorded of him during the suspension time, is a fan of Rabina Khan. And the reason is that Rabina Khan behaved towards him with extra regard and attention to whatever he called her about, whereas she did not do that in relation to our campaign or in relation to the questions that I was asking the council about Tower Hamlets community housing and the serious issue caused by the transfer of housing stock by Tower Hamlets Council to the likes of Poplar Haque and Tower Hamlets community housing. And when Leslie Pabbit resumed the meeting, she did not allow my question to be continued. So she excused Rabina Khan from giving the actual answer to my question, which I would have pressed for. Now, the myth that has been created about Tower Hamlets Council by the racist liars like Ted Jury and Mark Baines of the apartheid Wapping or Wapping apartheid is that Lutfur Rahman's side was in effect, in practice, opposed by the Labour Party side, while Lutfur Rahman was still in post and vice versa. That is absolute rubbish. Because the council meetings where the public could have the kind of a glimpse of what the two so-called different sides saw against or said against each other. This was a glimpse. There was no fundamental difference in terms of the attitude towards members of the community in Tower Hamlets by either side. And therefore there was no, and there is no record of any of the councillors making any significant intervention demanding accountability by the officers or staff in place. So here is the reason why I have called Tower Hamlets the most corrupt council. The reason I say that is because of the councils that I have knowledge of, at the time, Tower Hamlets Council was the most corrupt. And the same league is now kind of occupied by Newham Council, about which I became aware in detail after my earlier awareness of Tower Hamlets Council's behavior. That's the only difference in terms of time. The kind of obtaining of the evidence, the witnessing of the evidence of behavior by Newham Council came later than the witnessing and the obtaining of the evidence of the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council had begun, which began long time ago, as I have been saying. Now, in the judiciary, that is the county courts, the Crown Court in the criminal case, in the divisional courts, in the Court of Appeal, in the Supreme Court now, at no stage, at no level, does there exist a remedy against the corruption and criminality of the judicial bureaucracy. And if you look at if anyone looks at the accessible amount of rubbish under the complaint procedure, this, that, and the other, complaint procedure about the members of the judiciary or members of the court or whatever, there will be nothing there. And that itself is such a complicated diversion from the duty to provide remedies that we'll have to do a separate series of examinations. So we are going back to Tower Hamlets, and we are talking now about Jackie O'Donoghue. Now let's see what Jackie O'Donoghue is doing. We are going back to that question that I put to the so-called full council, which I spell FOOL, Fool's Council, on the 26th of June 2013. So reading again the email sent to me at 9:46 in the morning of 4th of July 2013 by Ms. Louise Fleming. Dear Mr. Haque, I write to confirm that the action arising from last night's cabinet meeting, that was the one that I addressed with my reading of the 222 word question. I write to confirm that the action, remember the action she's saying, arising from last night's cabinet meeting is that Ms. Jackie O'Donoghue, service head, strategy, regeneration, and sustainability, will speak to you regarding your public question, and if there were any issues you felt had not been addressed, this would be an opportunity to discuss these. Then you will receive a formal response in writing. I will pass your contact details to Ms. O'Donoghue, and her office will make contact with you. Now, these details were passed, of course, and as a result of that passing of the contact details, a woman called Nicole Layton wrote to me shortly after Miss Louise Fleming. And in that email, Miss Layton said to me that Jackie O'Donoghue would be contacting me on the following day. And this is what she's saying to me. Few hours, 9:46 was when Louise Fleming sent her email to me, and 3:01, that is 15:01 hours on the same date, 4th of July 2013, is when Nicole Layton sent her email to me. Dear Mr. Haque, I understand Mayor Rahman requested at yesterday's cabinet meeting that Jackie O'Donoghue provide a written response to your question. Now that is a contradiction. Louise Fleming said that Jackie O'Donoghue speak to me based on the quote direction of Luther Roman, because Luther Roman spoke to Jackie O'Donoghue in front of me at that meeting and asked her to speak to me, get in touch with me. So this one from Nicole Layton is false, and that falsehood is only possible to have been invented by Jackie O'Donoghue, not by Nicole Layton. The last sentence of Nicole Layton's email says, unfortunately, Jackie has been in meetings all day today, but will ensure that you receive the response tomorrow. I never received the response on the 5th of July 2013, nor have I received the response up to now, today, the 4th of November 2020. That is 7 years and 4 months later. And so therefore, the continuation of the corruption and lying by Tower Hamlets Council goes on unabated. And it is thus the case, based on the fact that Luther Roman has been succeeded by a liar. The Luther Roman who was ousted by Richard Morey for having used fraudulent and corrupt means to get elected on the 22nd of May 2014, has been succeeded by John Biggs, against whom no such allegation has been made by any member of the petitioning committee or petitioners. And so therefore he is supposedly different from Luther Roman, but he is not. To this day, Biggs has been made aware regularly of the evidence of my contacts and communications and demands to Tower Hamlets Council to do the duty according to the law and deliver the services according to needs. And John Biggs has not delivered, and nor has the rest of the Tower Hamlets Council's kind of senior decision makers. So, the woman in Bangladesh being tortured after being tricked out of her home in Tower Hamlets, and Luther Roman ignored that, John Biggs ignored that. Then the group of children being mistreated and abused in London, in Tower Hamlets, and the details were made known to Tower Hamlets Council, and Tower Hamlets Council refused to help those children. And the Court of Appeal, where one of the two biological kind of relations of the woman being tortured in Bangladesh, in the Court of Appeal, the hearing and the kind of pleadings bore no reference to the woman's life or woman's needs, let alone to the impact and implication of the abuse on the children. Now that is one group of children. There were other children who were being abused in a significantly different way, but they were being abused. And our campaign was the only one, remains the only one that could help both that woman until she passed away and these children. And Tower Hamlets Council knowingly ignored the opportunity and the duty and the emergency. And when I contacted the Court of Appeal and especially inquired into the reasons for the details of the identity of the woman and her needs being completely left out or distorted, totally distorted from the proceedings. When I demanded to know about this from the licensed law traders office, the licensed law traders clerk refused to give me the information. So that is, anyone who might have wondered why I call them licensed law trading liars should note this. This is the kind of behavior that justify and warrant and leave no alternative but to call them licensed law trading liars and crooks. And there is the additional problem. This particular licensed law trading liar was a non-Bangladeshi, whereas the litigants were Bangladeshis. And this person, who was not a Bangladeshi but a licensed law trader, had nothing but contempt for the life and the rights and the needs of this woman, about whom the other two were apparently in litigation, but actually doing so by exploiting the fact of that woman's position, where one of the litigants had put her by tricking her out of her home in London and taking her to Bangladesh and hiding or selling her passport, and thus giving the racists in the UK High Commission in London, in the UK, sorry, in Bangladesh, and the immigration entry certificate officer a pretext saying that the woman could not prove her identity. Now, remember, that woman was educationally challenged, if you like, and had high educational needs. Although in a setting when she was not as ill as she became, she could relate to members of the family absolutely perfectly, and she could relate to other members of the neighborhood or immediate kind of family relations, extended family relations, perfectly well. But she could not write and she could not do the things that she would have to be able to do in order to make up anything. According to all the observations, she was a saint. She was incapable of making up things. Whereas the British High Commission in Bangladesh and the entry certificate officers serially lied and defamed her, knowing full well that every day, every minute, she was losing her health and her well-being. And she was in a terrible state of being constantly afraid and scared and desperate for help. So our campaign wanted to help her by, first of all, getting the travel documents on an emergency basis made available to her so that she could travel back to London, and all the emergency needs she kind of had been deprived of getting attention to could be attended to. And that needed secure, proper housing provision for her. And I was involved in organizing all of that as the campaign. And Tower Hamlets Council, Lutfur Rahman, lied, and he lied through this Channel S chief reporter, Jubair, who kept saying that Lutfur Rahman was doing everything that I was asking him to do. And of course, Alibor Chaudhry, who said it 1,000 times that Lutfur Rahman was doing everything that I was asking him to do. And that Lutfur Rahman was never doing. And Alibor confessed to me years later in an unplanned meeting in Brick Lane, on the street in Brick Lane, that the main criminal who had been, or one of the main criminals in Tower Hamlets Council, Colin Cormack, had indeed been lying and refusing to provide the support that I was entitled to in terms of housing provisions that had been taken illegally away from me. Remember, that goes back to the Royal London Hospital incident of the building on the roof ceiling collapsing in September 1987. And when a complaint was made against that, instead of repairing and making the ceiling safe, the Royal London Hospital commenced a mass eviction of all the tenants in the similar kind of properties that they owned legally. So they started a mass eviction. So anyone reading or hearing about Tower Hamlets and the Bangladeshis should be paying attention when I say that this is a world exclusive diagnostic report on the Fleet Street, because Fleet Street is not reporting any of this. In fact, they are peddling the image of Tower Hamlets Council in this context of reporting about the charging of Afsana Begum with 3 counts of housing fraud. Now, the cost in terms of years, 15 plus years of the life of that particular woman and the rest of her life, Tower Hamlets Council destroyed. And the children affected by the abuses, the rest of their lives, their whole lives have been destroyed. And all of this could have been avoided if the racists, and especially the racist Michael Tyrrell, and the racist Colin Cormack, and the racist Steve Hill were stopped by Tower Hamlets Council from continuing their criminal assaults on my and my campaign's accommodations. Plus, of course, the needs of the vulnerable person and the children. Neither the woman nor the children could be helped in the way that their circumstances needed without proper accommodation being available. And that is what Colin Cormack was stopping, and that is what Steve Hill was stopping and preventing, and that is what Michael Tyrrell was stopping and preventing. So these are the details that are included in the negligence of Rabina Khan, the dishonesty of Rabina Khan, the lying of Rabina Khan, and the mental slavery by Rabina Khan to the likes of John White, and the mentally slavish discrimination, contempt Rabina Khan showed to me and to other Bangladeshis while she was in that post. One Bangladeshi from Shadwell met Steve Hill along with Rabina Khan and another councillor called Harun, not Muhammad Harun, but Harun Mia, who is once again a councillor from Shadwell. And when the meeting got underway, both Rabina Khan and Harun Mia played the role of dummies. And they left that Bangladeshi exposed to the lying and denials and criminality being perpetrated at that meeting by Steve Hill. So, Tower Hamlets Council is a corrupt council. And it's a corrupt gang, or it's a series of gangsters that operate under the collective name of Tower Hamlets Council, as is Tower Hamlets Community Housing. And as we said, in the case of the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the licensed law traders. So when we look at the findings, so-called, of the investigations into the behavior of the northern councils, when the mainly white children, white girls were being sexually abused and raped and gang raped by the gang of mainly Pakistani men, it's not the Pakistani man alone that violated those girls. We find that the local Labour Party councillors, and the local Asian kind of community so-called leaders, and the council's leadership let the girls down. Was that the only serious negligence? No, because the police also failed these children. So the excuse that the police have later issued, saying that they didn't take any action for fear that they would be accused of being racist, factually it's not true. It cannot stand. Because when they arrest somebody, or when they kind of treat any black or African or Asian person, which they do every week, nobody raises the question whether they're doing it because of racist kind of prejudice. People first of all look at the evidence, whatever they know. So when we diagnose Fleet Street, we diagnose all these evidence, all these details, and all these goings on that the Fleet Street completely ignores or distorts or misrepresents. And the contextual topical thing about Fleet Street is this. They are running these stories about the lockdown being resumed, but they're not running the stories about the actual movement of the virus and what actually are the factors, physical factors. And that is where we have been focused on throughout this series of broadcasts called Diagnosis of Fleet Street, in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the coverage of the pandemic and various aspects of it, which we shall be continuing in the next edition.